Hello and greetings from Zurich. It's an honor to welcome two amazing thinkers to this virtual Leaps talk, Doctors Mayim Bialik and Yuval Noah Harari. Conversations about the fear of disruptive innovation and the crisis of trust in science have never been more important. The blinding pace of advances we've seen in this last difficult year make it clear we are in the midst of a biorevolution. World-changing breakthroughs, once deemed impossible, are becoming a reality. But breakthroughs could fail to make impact if we can't build understanding or if we ignore underlying ethical questions. Leaps by Bayer is Bayer's impact investment unit tasked to invest in breakthrough technologies with the potential to address 10 huge challenges, or leaps as we call them. We began the Leaps talk series to spark conversation about biotech, ethics, and society. We are grateful to Tech Open Air, South by Southwest, these incredible speakers, and everyone else who helped make this conversation possible. Thank you so much, and please enjoy the session.
Hi, my name is Nico. I'm the founder of TOA, and I'm thrilled and honored to be hosting this Leaps talk today with Professor Yuval Noah Harari and Dr. Mayim Bialik. Two inspiring minds that I do not think need a lengthy introduction. I do want to thank South by Southwest Online and Leaps by Bayer, the impact investment arm of Bayer, for making this conversation today possible. So Mayim, I've been a great fan of your work ever since you stepped into our geeky world as a character on Big Bang Theory, and enjoyed your podcast series very much, Bialik's Breakdown. And you've actually done something that few have. You've been a best-selling author, you've been an award-winning actor, and also someone who holds a Ph.D. in neuroscience. And you've been switching back and forth between these two worlds, TV, comedy, and science. And I wonder, what are some of the surprising parallels between these two worlds?
Thank you for that lovely introduction. It's really an honor to be here with both of you. I obviously one of the nicest things about my life in academia, which was 12 years for my undergrad and graduate work, was that no one really cared what I look like. And of course, there's the patriarchy will follow you everywhere. And as a woman scientist, obviously we have different challenges, but for the most part, I lived a very, private life in terms of what was between my ears was the most important thing that I was, producing in my science career. Surprisingly, though, ego exists everywhere. And many people, I think, would be very surprised to know that there are personalities in academia, and in particular in the sciences, that are not strikingly different from, the kind of powerhouse producer types that I also interact with. So there is a lot of ego, there is a lot of jockeying for position. And the fact is, and I guess, as a neuroscientist who specialized in, neuropsychiatric issues, it's nice to know that there are problematic people in every field. You are not immune from that simply because you're a scientist or a very, wealthy, successful producer type.
Yuval, in your books, Sapiens, Homo Deus, and 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, you share fascinating insights into our past while exploring the future. The success of those books was staggering, and you just released a graphic novel, actually, of Sapiens. Surprisingly to me, doing some research on you, as one of the world's most preeminent writers out there, you say that you prefer TV over novels. How come?
Well, I do read novels also, but yes, I most of the time prefer TV. Basically, humans are storytelling animals. We think in stories. And TV is an amazing tool to create and to convey stories, maybe the most powerful tool of our time. And, my mission also as a writer and as a creator is to reach as wide an audience as possible. And TV can often do that better than novels. So I'm at least not surprised by my preference.
And I assume comedy is part of the mix.
Yes, certainly comedy is definitely part of the mix, especially if you're dealing with power. There is nothing that challenges power better than humor. It's one of the most effective weapons against it.
To start out, I want to talk to you about changes. We've been experiencing tremendous changes, of course, throughout the pandemic in our lives. Can you both share one thing that you believe will not change in our lifetime? Let's start with Mayim.
There are many things, but I think, you know, at the risk of sounding, you know, controversial, I think, you know, human connection and, you know, the fact that, you know, as humans, yes, we are wired for adaptation and we are wired for spontaneous mutations to occur and for, you know, incredible evolution to occur. But as mammals, as primates, as Homo sapiens sapiens, I would argue that human touch and human interaction of a non-technologically based variety is something that you know, I think is thankfully irreplaceable. But I could be totally wrong.
I think that you're absolutely right. This is also what came first to my mind. People will still hug. I think just as AIDS didn't kill sex, COVID won't kill hugging. We will hug after all this is over. It won't change.
And Yuval, the introduction of almost any transformative idea in the past has been met with wonder, but often also with rejection and with fear. One idea that I find recurring in all your books is that you stress that one thing that humanity can always count on is change. So I wonder, why then are we still afraid of it, of change and of innovation?
First, because it's inconvenient to start again, to learn new things. It's not easy. And secondly, it's very often dangerous. If you look at biology, then I guess that 99% of mutations are bad for you. It's a very, very small percentage, which actually improves things. Most startups fail. Even if you look at revolutions in history, so at least the more radical revolutions almost always, at least at first, bring more misery than happiness. It's usually the moderate revolutions that do better. Humans just are unable to completely rethink and reinvent the world. So if they try to change too much, too quickly, it's always a disaster. You know, you compare the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917 to the American Revolution, or so-called revolution, of the late 18th century. And one of the reasons the American Revolution did much better is because it tried to change much less. And when you look at the broad sweep of history, so especially if you're a kind of, you know, the average person, many of the big revolutions that we today celebrate in hindsight, they did not improve the life of the ordinary individual. To take one of the biggest examples, the agricultural revolution, the shift from living as hunter-gatherers to living as farmers, this was a good idea if you were a king or a high priest or something like that. But for the average farmer, it made life much harder. The average farmer, let's say in ancient Egypt or in medieval China, worked much harder than ancient hunter-gatherers. She or he got a worse diet in return. They suffered much more from diseases. Most of the infectious diseases and epidemics in history, they started with agriculture. They did not bother at all the hunter-gatherers. And on top of all that, you had to deal with all the social and political inequality that emerged with agriculture, that wasn't there before. So if you're living at the beginning of the agricultural revolution, and you are apprehensive about these new ideas and new gadgets, you are absolutely right to be apprehensive about them.
Mayim, what about our brain makes it actually hard to process and accept new ideas? And has there been a new idea, a technological invention that you can think of that you changed your mind about?
Well, you know, I think I'm going to kind of give the neuroscientific version of Yuval's answer, which is that, while our brains, again, are highly adaptive, and geared towards learning and geared towards incorporating new experiences, ultimately, we do seek the path of least resistance. And the notion, it's a very simplified concept, but the notion of a pleasure principle does apply to how we sort of gear our understanding of the world. And, I think we can see that in our individual responses, which also are highly variable. If you bring a new piece of technology to me versus my 15-year-old versus my 12-year-old, you're going to get a very different set of reactions. I remember my father, of blessed memory, when the internet became a thing, and my father was a first-generation American, staunch New Yorker, and he was talking to me and my then husband, and he said, "Yeah, I don't think this thing's going to take off like they think it will." And, my father passed 6 years ago, and, it was just in time, because I think it would have completely blown his mind, to see how much the world has changed even just in the past 6 years. I will say, and it is a funny example, but it's a true one. I didn't grow up, Yuval and I are essentially the same age. I was born in 1975, and, I grew up in a home that was modest. We rented a house with one bathroom till I was 16, and my brother was, almost 20, and we didn't have a lot of money. And I remember the first time I saw a microwave, it must have been, 1986, I don't know, something like that. And I remember I was at a wealthy friend's house because I was bused to schools in nicer neighborhoods than the neighborhood I grew up in. That was the magnet programs of the 70s and 80s. And I remember she showed me how you can take a mug of water and put it in this thing. And, you'd think she had just landed from another planet to tell me this. And, the water got hot and we made hot cocoa. And I went home to my first generation, American parents, and I said, "You'll never believe what just happened." And it took years for us to get, a microwave, a dishwasher. And while that's a funny example, that's the notion that I think many of us have, especially if we're not in the tech innovation sphere and we're experiencing new things. That's how astounding it is to me. I just taught my mother what Venmo is, and, besides learning English, I don't know if there's anything more exciting to her than Venmo.
Yuval, as long as there's been scientific inquiry, I assume there's been misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theories. What does history teach us about how to combat this headwind to scientific innovation and building acceptance for transformative technological advancement and scientific advancements in general?
Well, science and conspiracy theories and fake news and so forth, they are not really contradictory. They exist side by side. Because in order to control, in order to manage any human society, science is never enough. Science tells us the truth, or the approximation of the truth about the world. But the truth almost never unites people. You cannot run for elections on a platform saying E equals MC squared. You can run on that platform, almost nobody would vote for you. To unite people, either politically, religiously, socially, you need to tell them a story. And the story doesn't need to be true at all. Many of the most successful stories in human history were fictions. Religious fictions, nationalist fictions, economic fictions. And it's still good enough. And people can keep both things at the same time. They can be extremely scientific and rational and logical when they come to solve a particular technical problem, and to be completely irrational and without almost any critical faculties when they are evaluating the basic mythologies and stories of their society, of their movement. But we sometimes have the hope that if people shut down the prefrontal cortex when dealing with these basic stories of their politics or whatever, then it means that they will be ineffective in other fields, so we don't need to fear them. But it doesn't work like that. Unfortunately, humans have this ability to selectively switch on and off their kind of critical and rational faculties. And therefore, throughout history, you find this dual track cooperation. And similarly, people have this misguided notion. I remember that when the internet just came along, people had this idea that, oh, we just now share more information, so this will inevitably lead to greater freedom and scientific thinking and rationality. And it didn't happen because information isn't the truth. Fiction is also information. Fake news is also information, and it's not new. You look, for example, at the print revolution in early modern Europe. So the big blockbusters of the late 15th and early 16th century European book markets, they were not the scientific books of people like Copernicus and Galileo. They were do-it-yourself witch hunting manuals. This was the big craze of that time. All kinds of ridiculous conspiracies about witch hunting, which led to tens of thousands of people, mostly women, being tortured and murdered in terrible ways. And this was powered by this new mass communication technology of print. The same way that people say today, it's true, I saw it on YouTube. So imagine some town in 15th century or 16th century Germany that they are going witch hunting, and the leader says, it's true, I read it in a book. How can you doubt something that you read in a book? And it took a long time for people to realize, look, just because it's written in a book, it doesn't mean it's true. So we are now in the same situation with these new technologies, and I hope that our learning curve would be a bit quicker than with print.
I did want to just kind of jump in and note that, yes, while the prefrontal cortex is, the seat of a lot of initiatory behaviors, but also what we kind of consider judgment. And, a Phineas gauge being the most common example of what happens when the prefrontal cortex is damaged. You often get a significant shift in kind of who a person is in terms of their ability to make judgments about behavior, about ethics. But just, again, for full transparency, this illustrates the complexity and the difficulty with kind of connecting brain science to the human experience as a linear connection, because what is involved in suppressing, as Yuval pointed out, what is involved in suppressing logic and reason and, for modern purposes, kind of, having a heart and not having a cold kind of perspective that is driven by your own personal goals, that's a much more complicated integration of not only, neuroanatomy, but the complete integration of our social construct, like the cultural construct. It all gets mushed in there. So again, I totally know that you didn't think that the prefrontal cortex can be turned off, but I did feel like I needed to jump in.
It's really a metaphor, of course, but I would be interested to hear, what do you think happens in a brain? What happens there when, again, the same person can be the most rational in some aspects and, completely uncritical with dealing with other issues? And again, the thing is, extremely important issues. Like you can spend days and days and years, preparing something extremely rationally based on an idea which you spent almost no time investigating.
No, I think what we're talking about, is really a distinction between brain and mind. In the most broadest terms, the notion of what's going on in the brain, I'm happy to look at, functional MRI studies all day about where the ethical seat is in the brain. And even that, just like there's not, you remember when we got so excited about genetics, in the 80s and 90s, we thought, oh, where's the gene for this? Where's the gene for that? And it turns out it's tens of thousands of interactions and There's so many positive feedback loops, negative feedback loops in the brain. This is the superhighway of superhighways. So when you take really any rational concept, it doesn't exist in isolation, tucked into a neuroanatomical structure. That's not something we can dissect out. And while there are regions of the brain, as we all know and have known for the better part, of this century at least, there are regions that we can say this does that. And this does that. Oh, and if we, lesion this in a monkey, we're going to see this, right? But when it comes to these very, very complicated interplays of, as I said, the social construct, the cultural construct, the patriarchy, misogyny, all these things, the pressures of an environment, the pressures of a community, and the individual variation in the individual, then you're going to see an interplay that there is no equation for. But the ability to think broadly, creatively, compassionately, in a way that moves forward the things that, a liberal society holds true, that is infinitely more complicated. And I do believe, and, as a scientist who also is a person of faith, this is the unexplainable. And you can call it divine, or you can call it mysterious, you can call it the soul, but that's really where this intersection comes in. It's not simply about the structures.
I know that they are now working on all these kinds of gadgets that warn people when they are making decisions in an irresponsible or an irrational way. For instance, let's say that you are a stock trader and you are dealing every second with millions of dollars. So your bank or investment firm or whatever, they would like you to put this hat on, which monitors your brain activity. And once you start making decisions in a capricious way, that you're not thinking things through, a light bulb lights up, a red light bulb, stop trading. Now, let's say that this can be done. So first I would like to hear your opinion, can it actually be done? And if it can be done, do you think that the same hat will then be used also when the same investment banker is listening to a political speech or to a religious sermon? He will take, or she will take, the hat from work also to church or to the political rally and put it on, and when it lights red, oh, something is going on here.
There are absolutely ways for us to, from a neuroscience, from an electrophysiological perspective, be able to say there are patterns of activity that can indicate a certain trajectory for decision making, 100%. We're also, we have to keep in mind, we're speaking in a statistical realm right now. It gets into very shady and ethically shady, very, very complicated territory because of exactly all the reasons you pointed out. Would I love to make every person I've ever dated wear this hat? Would I love to wear that hat when I'm dating a person? Sure. But, this is a much more, I think, complicated conversation about what we can expect technology to do, what it's supposed to do, and also where it is allowed to fill in the blanks of what I was raised is called seichel, that sort of internal, street sense knowledge that something is right or wrong. But I think especially, especially here in America, the concepts of right or wrong are even so fuzzy right now. And we're seeing that specifically in this past year with how we talk even about COVID, how we talk about vaccines, how we talk about what's going on with the planet. So I'll leave it at that and just say that Yuval, if you'd ever like to have a further conversation, I could talk about that funny, cap that people want to wear all day.
I guess with COVID, we're all finding ourselves having some type of discussion with family, with friends, defending the truth, whatever the truth is, according to Yuval. And sort of fighting the fake news. Just referencing the YouTube video that you did on asking people or sharing your plan to actually take the COVID vaccination. What led you to do that and go out into the public, into the open to talk about it? And should more people of prominence do so?
The reason that I chose to be public to, almost the 1 million followers that I have on YouTube is I was a late vaccinator. My children were vaccinated on a different schedule than other people. And the fact is, because I'm a public person, yes, people knew that. I wrote a book about our experience as parents called Beyond the Sling. At that time, my children were not vaccinated for a lot of reasons that really are no one's business. And what happened was, and I'm sure this is, not surprising to anyone, the internet, took this notion that my children at the time of that writing were not vaccinated, and they're kind of spread this notion that Mayim is an anti-vaxxer and Mayim Bialik should have her children taken away from her and Mayim Bialik should not be allowed to hold a Ph.D. from UCLA. The fact is my children are vaccinated now, and the level of hysteria people had surrounding the fact that a public person might have delayed vaccinations was also astounding to me. I decided to make a video because I never have spoken about this overtly publicly because of the lack of discourse surrounding it. And there are a few issues, and vaccines are definitely one of them, where there are many people who do not want to have a conversation. The other is circumcision, interestingly, just, for another time and topic. But what I decided to do was make a video about my decision and kind of finally say once and for all that it's okay to be skeptical about the financial components of the pharmaceutical industry. It's okay to ask questions of what's in the vaccine. It's okay to ask what the efficacy is of any vaccine. It's okay to wonder why there are vaccines that are used now that didn't used to be used. And it's okay to ask why we used to get 12 shots and now many children get upwards of 24 and sometimes 36. It's okay to ask those questions. In a functioning society that is based on intellectual progress and a compassionate level of communication, we are allowed to have those conversations. We're also allowed to receive information. So that's kind of what I was trying to balance, to say it's okay to be skeptical and it's okay to ask questions. It's also not okay to not even know what you're talking about and be fighting with other people about it. I advocate for people getting educated, and in my case, that means rolling up our sleeves and yes, also getting a flu vaccine this year, which is not something I typically do. I am a hippie who tends to believe that the immune system can and will produce immunity, and getting the flu is something we have done many times in this house. We had H1N1. That was not fun either. But this virus is different. It's indiscriminate in ways that we don't fully understand, and it should be treated as such.
So we're shifting gears to the next section. And Yuval, one thing I was really hoping to ask you for quite some time, being sort of from the startup and tech world and always listening to the Silicon Valley founders talking about how more automation may actually lead to a new renaissance era of creativity and self-actualization for everybody. Do you see historic parallels in the way that this vision is being promised and sold to us?
It's always the same thing. I mean, whenever somebody comes up with a new idea for a technology, for a social system, whatever, then obviously they are going to present it in the most positive and optimistic way. And we have to be careful about it because it often backfires. You look at the promises made at the dawn of the internet era in the 1990s, and I'm specifically talking about the social and political consequences. That people said this will bring a new era of democracy and tolerance and cooperation because people will be able to share information and get to know each other. And now it sounds extremely, extremely naive. So, that's basically my job as a historian and as a philosopher. Yes, if you have a startup, or if you're an entrepreneur, or you're developing a new technology, obviously you are going to focus on the most positive scenarios. And there are positive scenarios, that's the truth. And then it becomes the job of people like me to present the other side, that there are also dangers. I don't think there is a single technology in history which has only a positive potential. You know, a knife can be used to cut salad. It can be used to operate as a surgeon on somebody and save their lives. And obviously it can be used to murder people. The knife is, you know, can do with it. It doesn't tell you what to do with it. It's the same with the mass communication technologies we have seen in the 20th century. Something like radio can be used to broadcast a range of different musical tastes and political opinions and so forth. And it can also be monopolized by a government to brainwash a population and create a totalitarian regime. The radio doesn't care what you do with it. It doesn't tell you what to do with it. So this is something that we constantly need to remind the innovators and the people who are at the forefront of these developments. I think, for example, that it's almost outrageous that today, in order to be a doctor, you need, in most universities, in most countries, you need to take a course or several courses in medical ethics. You won't be able to get your certificate as a physician unless you have some knowledge, some background in medical ethics. But to be a coder, you don't need any ethics. Even though the coders are now the ones who are shaping the entire society. The algorithms that they are not just coding algorithms, they are coding entire societies, entire economies. And I think that, you know, every day that passes, that we don't make it an obligatory requirement. You want to work in Silicon Valley as a coder, wonderful, but as part of your course of studies, you must take ethics for coders.
And if I may just ask one follow-up on Yuval, and then Mayim, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this. If we compare the last 20 years to maybe what is about to happen in the life sciences world, right? We sort of went through 20 years of high-tech development in the technology field, and now there's this expectation of a similar dynamic in the life sciences field. What, Yuval, would you hope that we had learned from those 20 years of technology evolution to be carried over to life science innovation?
Basically, not to be so naive and not to focus, you know, you develop something, do this thought experiment. Think about the politician or the leader you are most afraid of in your country or in the world, and now think what he or she would do with the thing you are developing. And just take some time off from your lab work to just have this little thought experiment and then go back to the lab and maybe do things a little differently, because we do have choice. The way that we develop technology, it's up to us. You know, for the last 20 years, you had some of the smartest people in the world working on the problem of how to make people click on ads and how to make people click on links. And they solved it. Unfortunately, they solved it. And now we see the consequences. But nobody, there are so many problems in science and technology that the smartest people in the world can dedicate years of their life to solving. So why focus on this problem, how to make people click on ads? You could have worked on something else. So as an example, you can work on developing apps for tracing government corruption. Like, I want an app on my smartphone, if I had a smartphone, on my husband's smartphone, that you enter the app, you fill in the name of a politician, you press a button, and within 2 seconds, you get a list of all the friends and family members of that politician that he or she appointed to various jobs in the administration or whatever. I want this kind of app. Why don't I have it? Somebody could have created it.
You also want an antivirus for the mind.
Yeah, this is a much bigger project, and this links to what you were mentioning, the developments in the life sciences. The last 20 years, we saw an immense revolution in information technology. But the real big thing will come when the revolution in infotech will merge with an equivalent revolution in biotech. That it will really become possible to hack not just my smartphone and email, but to hack my brain, to gather immense amounts of data on my body, on my brain, and to hack that. And to prepare for this kind of world, which is coming sooner, I think, than many people realize, we need an antivirus for the brain, for the mind. Even today, you think about something like fake news. Fake news basically uses our own weaknesses against us. If the hackers, if the bots, they discover by monitoring you that you already have a bias against a particular group of people. So they will show you fake news about that particular group because you have an irresistible urge to click on it. What did they do this time? And you will easily believe the fake news because you have this pre-existing bias. So I want an antivirus for the brain that serves me, not some corporation, that also gets to know me and knows that I have this bias against this group and warns me, watch out, you are being manipulated, and maybe even be authorized to block these kinds of manipulations. Because, you know, we should come to terms, I think, with the fact that we, as a human being, I know very little about myself. I have this notion, this illusion of free will, that I completely control my life, my decisions, my opinions. I know myself, I control my life, and that's not the case. So much of our opinions and decisions are the result of processes within us and outside us that we don't understand. And we need help in this era of protecting ourselves from these new kinds of manipulations.
And Mayim, just one thing that I would like to pick up upon, something that Yuval was sort of referencing to. I read your quote from Yuval. He said, "Science can't answer everything, and it certainly can't provide us with a response to ethical dilemmas." What then is the role of scientists and engineers when it comes to ethical questions? Things like bias, for example. And of course, I'd be also interested to hearing sort of your vision for ethical life science and general scientific developments to come.
There's a lot here, and there's so much I want to respond to in what you've all just said. But I think it's important to to see all of these kinds of decisions that we make again within the lens of individual human variability. And I think as you've all said, like we can't have this expectation that there is a way that we're going to react, behave, or process. But it's very hard not to think of it kind of in the lens of in particular what's been going on in the United States. We have a very, very divided country, and Israel is no stranger to divided countries. But the notion that science should in any way be compromised by any sort of outside influence is particularly troubling, and I think that's very troubling for scientists in particular. I think what I will say, cloning is the first time I remember that this notion of ethics was sort of introduced to me, and cloning happened even before I began my academic career. And it's so interesting just to see, again, the variability. And there were people who received cloning, with a ticker tape parade practically. And then there were those of us who were very, 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 very nervous about the implications of it. And for me, I've seen that over and over, and I likely will continue to see it over and over. And my specialty is not innovation and technology in neuroscience. It's neuropsychiatry and obsessive compulsive disorder and interactions with humans. And, the fact is, just witnessing what technology has done for the basis of the future of life science, dating, and that sort of interaction, I think has been an astounding example of, wonderful ways that the world can get smaller, and also some really, really complicated implications of that. So I'm gonna leave it at that because I so enjoyed Yuval's explanation of all of this. And like I said, I just also appreciate being able to have a sense of humor about the absurdity, of a lot of these trends.
And Yuval, you talk about sort of three core threads, one being nuclear destruction, the second being the ecological climate crisis, and then thirdly, the tech and sort of bioengineering. And you say that the third one is maybe the most complicated one because it's the only one where there's no agreement on what the actual goal is. So I wonder, what are the competing goals? And how can we find alignment on them? Is cooperation, what you talk about a lot also in your books, is that going to solve it? Even though we may have never seen, cooperation on that large scale ever before in humankind.
Yeah, it's a prerequisite. If you want to regulate something like bioengineering, you need a global agreement, otherwise it won't work. Let's say the United States bans all genetic manipulation of human babies, let's say. But other countries don't follow this policy. They have an aggressive policy of genetic experiments on humans or trying to create superhumans. Very soon, even the US will be forced or tempted to break its own ban because it wouldn't like to stay behind. If these technologies really, if it doesn't work, if it's just science fiction, then nobody cares. But if it does work, if you are able to create more disciplined soldiers in that way, if you are able to create smarter scientists in this way, then nobody would like to stay behind. So we will have a bioengineering arms race. And similarly, if you think about something like AI, and this is not a future scenario, we are already now in the midst of an accelerating AI arms race, whether it's in the production of autonomous weapons, what is known as killer robots, but also in many other fields. And the only possible way to really regulate and slow down this arms race is through global cooperation. Now, again, I'm not very hopeful. I don't see many signs that we are moving in that direction. But I just don't see any possibility of regulating something as explosive as AI unless you get the Americans and the Chinese and the Europeans and the Russians to agree on some basic framework.
And much of it also seems to be driven in a way by sort of our endless want for continued economic growth. I wonder, Mayim, what are your thoughts around it? Is this sustainable, or will we maybe need to have a total reset also around that thinking of, what is sustainable growth?
I am not the one to speak to it, I'm certain. But I will say, I'm used to being the downer at parties, but it sounds like Yuval is the one who really, he has a perspective that is honestly, much more helpful, I think, to answer that question. So I defer to him.
At present, our economy is based on growth. This is the number one goal of every government in the world. It doesn't matter if it's an authoritarian or democratic or Jewish or Islamic, they all want to see economic growth. Honestly speaking, most of the money in the world is based on the expectation of future growth. Most of the money in the world now really has no cover. It's nothing. It's just an expectation for future profits, for future growth. If you now stop all economic growth in the world, zero growth, that's it. Not for a month, not for a year, that's it. Then the economy won't stop. It will completely collapse. It's like, an airplane or a bicycle. They can't just stop. If they stop, they fall. If you think about the immense increase in the value of companies like Tesla and Uber and all these tech giants, many of them hardly make any money. It's all expectations for future growth. If you don't have that, the economy will collapse. Similarly, in the political field, most political capital is expectation for future growth. In the Middle Ages, it was different. The expectations from kings in the Middle Ages was basically change nothing, keep things as they are. But in the modern world, the expectation is for improvement. Now, if you're, I don't know, let's say if you're the Prime Minister of India, and you now come to the 1.2, 1.3 billion people in India, and you tell them, that's the end of the line, folks. We are not going to grow anymore. If you're living in some shack on a shanty town near Mumbai, that's the way it stays, because there is no longer any economic growth. Then you have political catastrophe. Because the whole political system is based on the expectations that if we choose the right person and we have the right policies, things will improve. So I think the real question is, how do we sustain economic growth without destroying the ecological system? Can we do it? Can we create new, better technologies that will allow economic growth in the sense of improving, for example, the daily life of the average Indian without destroying the ecosystem? Because again, it's very obvious that with present-day technology, if every Indian and every Chinese and every Nigerian will enjoy the same standard of living as the average American, that's the end of this planet, or at least the conditions for sustaining human civilization. So how to find a cleaner way, a better way to grow, that's the big question.
A question to both of you. You are both obviously with the work in comedy, Mayim with her podcast, Bialik's Breakdown, Yuval just releasing a graphic novel of Sapiens, like mentioned before. You're experts at taking complex information and breaking it down into digestible pieces that are interesting to a wider audience. I wonder, what can the science community, what can innovators out there learn from how you use storytelling in your work? Let's start with you, Mayim.
You know, obviously as an employed actor, I'm less focused on sort of communicating large concepts. I'm an entertainer, you know, and while I hope that what I do also has meaning and heart, you know, I work on a television show called Call Me Kat, and it's on Fox, and you know, we are the warm chocolate chip cookie of television right now, is how we look at ourselves. So, you know, the work that I choose to do as an advocate for STEM, you know, the work that I try and do in support of technology that is safe and secure and, again, compassionate, for lack of a better word, that's sort of where I put more of my ethical decision-making about what I participate in. I do have a podcast. It's called Mayim Bialik's Breakdown, which is trying to break down concepts of mental health in terms of a larger understanding of the connection between mind and body, the significance and scientific basis of things like meditation. And, you know, that really came out of a year of COVID, where many people were experiencing things that they had never experienced before. As someone who's been open about my mental health struggles and that of, you know, my family and many families, I sort of have chosen to use that as a way to, you know, to try and equalize and normalize some of this conversation. You know, I will say, before I turn it over to Yuval, you know, one of the things that I've seemed to balance in my career, not just my acting career, but, you know, in my public presence, which, you know, it's several million, you know, people that I have the ability to reach through Facebook and through Instagram and through Twitter and through YouTube and now through a podcast. You know, I've always attracted people from, quote, both sides, whatever those sides might be. And that's actually a road that I try and stay right in the middle of, not because I want all the viewers and, you know, what I do in this portion of my life, you know, that's not my moneymaker. That's where my heart and my time and literally the work of my passion is. But the notion is, you know, we've lost nuance, and I've seen that in my lifetime. We've lost the ability to understand subtlety, to understand nuance, both in comedy and in science, and also in politics, and also in technology. So I feel like this is, I get to do my part with my abilities as a trained, neuroscientist who then raised children and returned to acting because I was running out of insurance. That's sort of like all of the different plates that I spin. But my overarching hope is that I can try and, do my part to return a notion of civility to discourse, whatever it is we're speaking about. So I will leave it at that and hope that answers it.
Yeah, I think what Mayim is doing is really wonderful, and I hope that more scientists will take inspiration from her. The same way that we have actors who are politicians or politicians who are actors, scientists also need to be a part of that game. We need to reach the general public, and to reach the general public, you need to be good at storytelling. Now, this is not the job of most scientists. We need just, some of them. But even if you don't become a full-time actor, you just, as a scientist, you take this responsibility, you devote 5% of your time to doing things to reach the general public. Write Wikipedia entries. Every now and then go on a radio show, whatever. This can be extremely helpful, provided that we remember, again, the basic thing that humans think in stories, not in statistics and mathematical models and so forth. So we need to find this way to bridge how to take the complex, very complex ideas and theories of science and translate them into stories that people can relate to and people can understand. That's the big challenge. If we as scientists don't do it, it simply leaves the arena open for far less responsible people to fill this vacuum. So I hope that maybe scientists and scholars who are watching us will take inspiration and have this idea to try and contribute something to this, building this bridge between the citadels of science and the general public.
And lastly, Yuval, I wonder, to get something optimistic out of you today, are we better off today than we were 100 years ago? And what are you personally hopeful for the future?
As humans, we are absolutely better off. The planet is in a worse situation, and animals are in a worse situation, but humans, it's the best time ever to be a human being. We are not just more powerful, but we are healthier, we are more peaceful than ever before. For the first time in human history, violence kills fewer people than accidents. You have a much, much higher chance of dying because you ate too much junk food than because somebody shot you or blew you up. And this is a huge achievement. And it's not just a technological achievement. It's a moral and political achievement. So I think this should give us hope that, and again, this should, I'm not saying it to be complacent, then okay, we can relax, we've got it. No, it's actually make us more responsible. People who say that no, things are as bad as they ever were, this is extremely, not just depressing, it makes, well, if everything people have been trying to do for centuries have not accomplished anything, then it's probably hopeless. Maybe there is some law of nature that the level of violence in the world is constant. Whatever you do, you save some here, it blows up there. But no, when you realize that things can actually improve, it makes you more responsible. And I'll just finish by commenting on the COVID situation, that we have been, on the scientific level, we are in a better position to deal with this virus than with any previous epidemic in human history. If we don't do it, it's a political failure. It's not a law of nature. So I hope that this will make us more responsible. If we fail to stop this epidemic and future epidemics, it's not because of the laws of nature, it's because we are suffering from a political lack of wisdom.
That was his most optimistic answer, and I loved it.
And Mayim, to conclude, as we're reaching the end, what are you hopeful for? Or what makes you hopeful?
There's a lot that I think 2020 in particular has shown us, and I think there's a lot that's been exposed, for many of us about, in particular in the country that I live in, about inequality and larger issues that many of us have known about and many have not, simply spoken about. My hope is that the conversations also around who has access to this vaccine will open up larger conversations about who has access to mental health care, who has access to having a voice. I think that there are much larger conversations that can and should come out of what we've been through. I'm hopeful about that. I generally am very cynical and very protective. And, as a person also who is a vegan, and who makes choices that I hope even in small ways do have an impact on our planet and even the climate. I'm also hopeful that we continue to have those kinds of conversations as well.
Thank you so much, Mayim. Another thing you share with Yuval, by the way, the veganism. So I want to thank both of you. I think we probably would have needed another 5 hours to get through half of the other questions that we have prepared, but we're really thankful for your time. I want to thank South by Southwest. I want to thank Leaps. And I want to thank all the people behind the scenes that made this possible today. So thank you very much and stay healthy, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.